To understand how things got this bad, we have to look at a massive shift in how human beings lived. For centuries, populations were scattered across wide rural landscapes. If you lived on a farm and threw a bucket of waste out the door, nature took care of it. The soil absorbed it, the rain washed it away, and the sheer amount of open space prevented any real danger to public health. But as the 14th century progressed, the world began to change. Trade hubs boomed, markets flourished, and thousands of people packed up their lives to move to the city. Everyone wanted a piece of the new economic dream. This sudden migration created what historians call the Great Urban Paradox. People rushed into these cities for a better life, but the cities themselves were entirely unprepared for them. Medieval urban centres were never designed to hold tens of thousands of people. Multi-storey timber houses were built tightly together, leaning out over narrow, dark lanes, blocking out the sunlight. As high-density living became the norm, humanity ran into a massive, unavoidable problem. The waste had absolutely nowhere to go. What followed was the birth of the Great Stench, a permanent heavy fixture of the 14th century sensory experience. It wasn't just a bad smell you could walk away from. It was a physical presence that coated your clothes, ruined your food, and filled every breath you took. The root of this crisis lay just beneath the surface, hidden away in backyards and dark alleys. In a world without indoor plumbing or centralized sewer networks, cities relied heavily on things called cesspits. These were essentially deep pits dug directly into the earth to collect human waste, or what was politely referred to at the time as night soil. On paper, it sounds like a simple solution, but in reality, it was a ticking ecological time bomb. These cesspools were almost completely unlined. Instead of being sealed with brick or concrete, they were built with loose wood or dug straight into porous limestone. Because of this primitive design, liquid waste didn't just sit in the pit waiting to be cleared out. It slowly and continuously seeped through the limestone and wood, migrating directly into the surrounding soil. The ground beneath a medieval city quickly became completely saturated with raw sewage. This is where the situation turned deadly. Most everyday citizens didn't have access to distant mountain springs. Instead, they got their daily water from shallow wells dug right in their own backyards, often just a few feet away from the very cesspits they used every single day. The failure of these backyard pits meant that human waste was constantly, slowly poisoning the shallow water tables. People were drawing up water that looked relatively clear, but was teeming with invisible, lethal pathogens. Every time someone took a drink, cooked a meal, or washed their face, they were gambling with their lives, entirely unaware that their neighbour's waste was quietly rewriting their fate underground. If the hidden dangers of the backyard weren't enough, stepping out onto the front street offered no relief. Medieval streets were a far cry from the clean pavement we enjoy today. They were mostly dirt, gravel, or uneven cobblestones, designed with a shallow ditch running straight down the middle. This ditch was known as a kennel or a street gutter. In theory, it was supposed to carry rainwater away from the homes and keep the lanes dry. In practice, it completely failed to move stagnant fluids. Instead of draining, these gutters became open-air sewers. Since there was no garbage collection, citizens routinely opened their front windows and emptied their chamber pots directly into the street, hoping it would somehow wash away. But it didn't stop with domestic waste. Medieval cities were also industrial hubs, and these industries operated right alongside residential areas. Imagine the local tanneries, where workers processed animal hides, using highly toxic chemical mixtures, urine and lime. All of that foul industrial runoff was dumped directly into the middle of the street, mixing with the biological waste of thousands of residents. When the seasons changed and heavy rains arrived, you might think it would wash the city clean. But the reality was a complete catastrophe. The primitive drainage gutters were easily overwhelmed by even a moderate downpour. Instead of clearing the filth, the rainwater churned up weeks of baked-on human waste and industrial chemicals, transforming the streets into thick, flowing rivers of toxic slurry. This highly infectious soup would overflow the banks of the gutters, splashing against the walls of houses and pouring directly through the doorways of ground-floor residents. Walking down the street wasn't just unpleasant, it required navigating a literal swamp of disease. You have to wonder why nobody stepped in to fix this disaster. The answer lies in the total failure of bureaucratic inertia. It wasn't that medieval authorities were entirely blind to the issue. Local governments actually passed numerous ordinances and threatened citizens with heavy fines for dumping waste into public spaces. But these laws were largely ignored by a population that was trapped in a cycle of immediate survival. If you are a poor labourer working long hours just to feed your children, finding a designated legal disposal site blocks away isn't your priority. It was far easier and faster to just dump your waste where no one was looking. Furthermore, medieval Europe was defined by fragmented political power. There was no centralized government, no unified Department of Public Works, and no large-scale engineering budgets. Power was split between weak kings, local lords, competing merchant guilds, and church authorities. Because everyone was busy protecting their own territory and profits, nobody wanted to take responsibility for the massive, expensive infrastructure projects needed to save the city. The ancient Romans had built incredible aqueducts and expansive underground sewers centuries earlier, but that centralized engineering knowledge was long gone. Medieval societies chose the economic convenience of short-term fixes, entirely blind to the fact that their refusal to invest in systemic solutions was causing a slow, multi-generational collapse of public health. The tragic legacy of this failure was the complete and total contamination of urban water tables. Because people back then didn't understand microbiology, they didn't realize that the water was killing them. Instead, they relied on the miasma theory, the widespread belief that deadly diseases like the plague or cholera were caused exclusively by breathing in foul, corrupted air. While their scientific understanding was completely wrong, their absolute terror of the terrible smell ironically drove humanity in the right direction. Over the centuries, the desperate desire to escape the suffocating stench forced societies to rethink how cities were built. It laid the groundwork for the birth of modern hydraulic engineering, as future planners realized that waste had to be physically trapped, channeled, and carried far away from human habitats if a city was going to survive. Looking back from our perspective, it is easy to view the 14th century as a distant, bizarre nightmare that has nothing to do with us, but the truth is much closer to home. Even as we live in the year 2026, many of the world's most rapidly expanding megacities are facing incredibly similar urban sanitation challenges. When populations boom faster than local governments can lay down pipes and clean water systems, the ghost of the medieval drainage failure returns. It serves as a stark, powerful reminder that the comforts of modern sanitation are incredibly fragile and that managing our collective waste remains one of the greatest, most continuous battles that human civilization will ever have to fight.